Artemis was one of the most widely venerated of the ancient Greek deities. Her Roman equivalent is Diana. Some scholars believe that the name, and indeed the goddess herself, was originally pre-Greek. Homer refers to her as Artemis Agroterra, Potnia Theron, Artemis of the wildland, mistress of animals. The Arcadians believed she was the daughter of Demeter. In the classical period of Greek mythology, Artemis was often described as the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and the twin sister of Apollo. She was the Hellenic goddess of the hunt, wild animals, wilderness, childbirth, virginity and protector of young girls, bringing and relieving disease in women. She often was depicted as a huntress carrying a bow and arrows. The deer and the cypress were sacred to her. In later Hellenistic times, she even assumed the ancient role of Alethea in aiding childbirth. Etymology. The name Artemis is of unknown or uncertain origin and etymology, although various ones have been proposed. For example, according to Jablonski, the name is also Phrygian and could be compared with the royal appellation Artemis of Xenophon. According to Charles Anthon, the primitive root of the name is probably of Persian origin from ****, all meaning great, excellent, holy. Thus Artemis becomes identical with the Great Mother of Nature, even as she was worshipped at Ephesus. Anton Goebel suggests the root sigma tau rho alpha tau or alpha tau to shake, and makes Artemis mean the thrower of the dart or the shooter. Babinotis, while accepting that the etymology is unknown, states that the name is already attested in Mycenaean Greek and is possibly of pre-Hellenic origin. The name could also be possibly related to Greek Arctis, Bua, supported by the bear cult that the goddess had in Attica and the Neolithic remains at the Archaudiotis cave, as well as the story about Callisto, which was originally about Artemis. This cult was a survival of very old totemic and shamanistic rituals and formed part of a larger bear cult found further afield in other Indo-European cultures. It is believed that a precursor of Artemis was worshipped in Minoan Crete as the goddess of mountains and hunting, Britomartis. While connection with Anatolian names has been suggested, the earliest attested forms of the name Artemis are the Mycenaean Greek, Atemitou, Artemitos, and Atemite, Artemite, written in Linear Beat Pylos. R.S. P. Beeks suggested that the E-I interchange points to a pre-Greek origin. Artemis was venerated in Lydia as Artemis. Ancient Greek writers, by way of folk etymology, and some modern scholars, have linked Artemis to Rho Tau Alpha Mu Omicron Sigma, Artamos, i.e., butcher, or, like Plato did in Cratylus, to Rho Tau Epsilon Mu Eta Sigma, Artemis, i.e., safe, unharmed, uninjured, pure, the stainless maiden. Artemis in mythology. Leto bore Apollon and Artemis, delighting in arrows, both of lovely shape like none of the heavenly gods, as she joined in love to the aegis-bearing ruler, Hesiod. Theogony. Lines 918 to 920. Birth. Various conflicting accounts are given in classical Greek mythology of the birth of Artemis and her twin brother, Apollo. All accounts agree, however, that she was the daughter of Zeus and Leto and that she was the twin sister of Apollo. An account by Callimachus has it that Hera forbade Leto to give birth on either terra firma or on an island. Hera was angry with Zeus, her husband, because he had impregnated Leto. But the island of Delos disobeyed Hera, and Leto gave birth there. In ancient Cretan history Leto was worshipped at Phaistos, and in Cretan mythology Leto gave birth to Apollo and Artemis at the islands known today as the Pax Amadia. A scholium of Servius on Aeneid i.e. 72 accounts for the island's archaic name Ortygia by asserting that Zeus transformed Leto into a quail in order to prevent Hera from finding out his infidelity, and Kenneth MacLeish suggested further that in quail form Leto would have given birth with as few birth pains as a mother quail suffers when it lays an egg. The myths also differ as to whether Artemis was born first, or Apollo. Most stories depict Artemis as born first, becoming her mother's midwife upon the birth of her brother Apollo. Childhood. The childhood of Artemis is not fully related in any surviving myth. The Iliad reduced the figure of the dread goddess to that of a girl, who, having been thrashed by Hera, climbs weeping into the lap of Zeus. A poem of Callimachus to the goddess, who amuses herself on mountains with archery, imagines some charming vignettes. According to Callimachus, at 3 years old, Artemis, while sitting on the knee of her father, Zeus, asked him to grant her 6 wishes. To remain always a virgin, to have many names to set her apart from her brother Apollo, to be the Phosphoria or light bringer, to have a bow and arrow and a knee-length tunic so that she could hunt, to have 60 daughters of Okeanos, all 9 years of age, to be her choir, and for 20 Amnesides nymphs as handmaidens to watch her dogs and bow while she rested. She wished for no city dedicated to her, but to rule the mountains, and for the ability to help women in the pains of childbirth. Artemis believed that she had been chosen by the fates to be a midwife, particularly since she had assisted her mother in the delivery of her twin brother, Apollo. All of her companions remained virgins, and Artemis closely guarded her own chastity. Her symbols included the golden bow and arrow, the hunting dog, the stag, and the moon. Callimachus tells how Artemis spent her girlhood seeking out the things that she would need to be a huntress. How she obtained her bow and arrows from the Isle of Lipara, where Hephaestus and the Cyclops worked. Okeanos' daughters were filled with fear, but the young Artemis bravely approached and asked for bow and arrows. Callimachus then tells how Artemis visited Pan, the god of the forest, who gave her 7 bitches and 6 dogs. She then captured 6 golden horned deer to pull her chariot. Artemis practiced with her bow first by shooting at trees and then at wild beasts. Intimacy. As a virgin, Artemis had interested many gods and men, but only her hunting companion, Orion, won her heart. Orion was accidentally killed either by Artemis or by Gaia. Alpheus, a river god, was in love with Artemis, but he realizes that he can do nothing to win her heart. So he decides to capture her. Artemis, who is with her companions at Trojan War, goes to Alpheus, but, suspicious of his motives, she covers her face with mud so that the river god does not recognize her. In another story, Alpheus tries to rape Artemis' attendant Arethusa. Artemis pities Arethusa and saves her by transforming Arethusa into a spring in Artemis' temple, Artemis Alphea in Letrini, where the goddess and her attendant drink. Buphagos, the son of the Titan Iapetos, sees Artemis and thinks about raping her. Reading his sinful thoughts, Artemis strikes him at Mount Pholoi. Cypriots is a boy who, either because he accidentally sees Artemis bathing or because he attempts to rape her, is turned into a girl by the goddess Actyon. Multiple versions of the Actyon myth survive, though many are fragmentary. The details vary, but of the core they involve a great hunter, Actyon, who Artemis turns into a stag for a transgression and who is then killed by hunting dogs. Usually the dogs are his own, who no longer recognize their master. Sometimes they are Artemis hounds. According to the standard modern text on the work, Lamar Ronald Lacey's The Myth of Actyon, Literary and Iconographic Studies, the most likely original version of the myth is that Actyon was the hunting companion of the goddess who, seeing her naked in her sacred spring, attempts to force himself on her. For this hubris he is turned into a stag and devoured by his own hounds. However, in some surviving versions Actyon is a stranger who happens upon her. Different tellings also diverge in the hunter's transgression, which is sometimes merely seeing the virgin goddess naked, sometimes boasting he is a better hunter than she, or even merely being a rival of Zeus for the affections of Semele. Adonis. In some versions of the story of Adonis, who was a late addition to Greek mythology during the Hellenistic period, Artemis sent a wild boar to kill Adonis as punishment for his hubristic boast that he was a better hunter than she. In other versions, Artemis killed Adonis for revenge. In later myths, Adonis had been related as a favorite of Aphrodite, and Aphrodite was responsible for the death of Hippolytus, who had been a favorite of Artemis. Therefore, Artemis killed Adonis to avenge Hippolytus's death. In yet another version, Adonis was not killed by Artemis, but by Ares, as punishment for being with Aphrodite. Orion was Artemis' hunting companion. In some versions, he is killed by Artemis, while in others he is killed by a scorpion sent by Gaia. In some versions, Orion tries to seduce Opus, one of Artemis' followers, and she kills him. In a version by Aratus, Orion takes hold of Artemis' robe and she killed him in self-defense. In yet another version, Apollo sends the scorpion. According to Hyginus, Artemis once loved Orion, but was tricked into killing him by her brother Apollo, who was protective of his sister's maidenhood. The Allodae, these twin sons of Iphidamia and Poseidon, Otos and Ephraltes, grew enormously at a young age. They were aggressive, great hunters, and could not be killed unless they killed each other. The growth of the Allodae never stopped, and they boasted that as soon as they could reach heaven, they would kidnap Artemis and Hera and take them as wives. The gods were afraid of them, except for Artemis, who captured a fine deer and jumped out between him. The Allodae threw their spears and so mistakenly killed each other. Callisto was the daughter of Lycon, king of Arcadia, and also was one of Artemis's hunting attendants. As a companion of Artemis, she took a vow of chastity. Zeus appeared to her disguised as Artemis, or in some stories Apollo, gained her confidence, then took advantage of her. As a result of this encounter she conceived a son, Arca. Enraged, Hera or Artemis changed her into a bear. Arca almost killed the bear, but Zeus stopped him just in time. Out of pity, Zeus placed Callisto the bear into the heavens, thus the origin of Callisto the bear as a constellation. Some stories say that he placed both Arca and Callisto into the heavens as bears, forming the Ursa Minor and Ursa Major constellations. Iphigenia and the Taurian Artemis. Artemis punished Agamemnon after he killed a sacred stag in a sacred grove and boasted that he was a better hunter than the goddess. When the Greek fleet was preparing at Aulis to depart for Troy to begin the Trojan War, Artemis becalmed the winds. The seer Calchas advised Agamemnon that the only way to appease Artemis was to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia. Artemis then snatched Iphigenia from the altar and substituted a deer. Various myths have been told around what happened after Artemis took her. Either she was brought to Tauris and led the priests there, or became Artemis a mortal companion. Niobe, queen of Thebes and wife of Amphion, Niobe boasted of her superiority to Leto because while she had 14 children, 7 boys and 7 girls, Leto had only one of each. When Artemis and Apollo heard this impiety, Apollo killed her sons as they practiced athletics, and Artemis shot her daughters, who died instantly without a sound. Apollo and Artemis used poisoned arrows to kill them, though according to some versions 2 of the Niobids were spared, 1 boy and 1 girl. Amphion, at the sight of his dead sons, killed himself. A devastated Niobe and her remaining children were turned to stone by Artemis as they wept. The gods themselves entombed them. Jionni was a princess of Pokes. She was beloved by 2 gods, Hermes and Apollo, and boasted that she was prettier than Artemis because she made 2 gods fall in love with her at once. Artemis was furious and killed Jionni with her arrow or struck her dumb by shooting off her tongue. However, some versions of this myth say Apollo and Hermes protected her from Artemis' wrath. Atalanta, Aeneas and the Melagrids. Artemis saved the infant Atalanta from dying of exposure after her father abandoned her. She sent a female bear to suckle the baby, who was then raised by hunters. but she later sent a bear to hurt Atalanta because people said Atalanta was a better hunter. This is in some stories. Among other adventures, Atalanta participated in the hunt for the Calydonian boar, which Artemis had sent to destroy Calydon because King Aeneas had forgotten her at the harvest sacrifices. In the hunt, Atalanta drew the first blood, and was awarded the prize of the skin. She hung it in a sacred grove at Tegea as a dedication to Artemis. Meleger was a hero of Aetolia. King Aeneas had him gather heroes from all over Greece to hunt the Calydonian boar. After the death of Meleger, Artemis turned his grieving sisters, the Melegrids, into guinea fowl that Artemis loved very much. Aura in non-use Dionysiaca. Aura was Greek goddess of breezes and cool air, daughter of Leontos and Peribia. She was a virgin huntress, just like Artemis, and proud of her maidenhood. One day, she claimed that the body of Artemis was too womanly and she doubted her virginity. Artemis asked Nemesis for help to avenge her dignity and caused the rape of Aura by Dionysus. Aura became a mad and dangerous killer. When she bore twin sons, she ate one of them while the other one, Iacchos, was saved by Artemis. Iacchos later became an attendant of Demeter and the leader of Eleusinian mysteries. Polyphanta was a young woman who fled home preferring the idea of a virginal life with Artemis to the conventional life of marriage and children favored by Aphrodite. As a punishment, Aphrodite cursed her, causing her to have children by a bear. The resulting offspring, Agrius and Aureus, were wild cannibals who incurred the hatred of Zeus. Ultimately the whole family were transformed into birds, and more specifically ill portents for mankind. Trojan War. Artemis may have been represented as a supporter of Troy because her brother Apollo was the patron god of the city and she herself was widely worshipped in western Anatolia in historical times. In the Iliad she came to blows with Hera, when the divine allies of the Greeks and Trojans engaged each other in conflict. Hera struck Artemis on the ears with her own quiver, causing the arrows to fall out. As Artemis fled crying to Zeus, Leto gathered up the bow and arrows. Artemis played quite a large part in this war. Like her mother and brother, who was widely worshipped at Troy, Artemis took the side of the Trojans. At the Greeks' journey to Troy, Artemis becalmed the sea and stopped the journey until an oracle came and said they could win the goddess' heart by sacrificing Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter. Agamemnon once promised the goddess he would sacrifice the dearest thing to him, which was Iphigenia, but broke the promise. Other sources said he boasted about his hunting ability and provoked the goddess' anger. Artemis saved Iphigenia because of her bravery. In some versions of the myth, Artemis made Iphigenia her attendant or turned her into Hecate, goddess of night, witchcraft, and the underworld. Aeneas was helped by Artemis, Leto, and Apollo. Apollo found him wounded by Diomedes and lifted him to heaven. There, the three of them secretly healed him in a great chamber.